invite you to take a moment to just breathe and pause and breathe through the nose. Never breathe through the mouth. Basically, that's what the science tells us now. So here we are, embodied. My name is Will Pye, and I'm a workshop leader and author and speaker and coach. And what I'm really passionate about is transformation, true transformation, as I call it, to literally create a different formation of bodies in the human, so their subtle energy system, the light body, our physical body, our thought body, our emotional body, all of us, the totality of our form is fundamentally different now than then. So we're now experiencing an entirely different frequency, you could say, of reality. And that's ironic in some regards because that passion was there well before I started to share or teach, or indeed have a diagnosis at 31 of a brain tumour. And the recent development and chapter in my story, and why I'm doing this video, is this is update number 5, I think, of the post-surgery. I'm going to talk a little bit about funny experiences, seizures, and mystical experiences. The update post-surgery, I think it's 95 days now since I completed a neurosurgical procedure which left considerable damage to the upper right parietal area of my brain, specifically around the motor strip, and some effect upon areas associated with processing visual data, creating a visual experience, and one or two other effects and challenges. And there's a hesitancy in speaking because what I'm about to share, it's so astonishing and remarkable. So where to start? Funny experiences. So the way I became aware that I had a brain tumour was through seizures. Initially a hand seizure or an arm seizure. So literally this left arm that is now so not problematic, this left arm, this left hand, this left limb that I am neurologically knowing again post-surgery. I was running along and it spasmed. I went to a doctor and I said, my arm spasmed whilst I was running along. And he said, you had an arm spasm. It's like, that doesn't generally happen to most people as I observe them walking around. Anyway, eventually there was a diagnosis. It was determined to be a brain tumour. And I then had other seizures after that. And after the surgery, there was a lot of concern that I would have greater susceptibility to seizure activity. Fortunately, I learned how to use breath. There's simultaneous surrendering to the energy of electrical overwhelm, the neurological overwhelm. So not resisting it, not being anxious about it, but yielding to the intense over-electrification, over-excitability of my neurological functioning. And at the same time, paradoxically, taking quite powerful action, which is simply to breathe into the center of the chest and down into my core, and connecting to the earth and feeling myself grounded, activating the parasympathetic nervous system, disengaging the fight and flight response, and predictably resulting in no seizure activity. And that was the case for about 10 years. And then I experienced a recurrence of seizure activity and had the surgery, and since then haven't had any seizures. Well, this is where it gets interesting with language. So for me, a seizure involves some degree of convulsion and or loss of consciousness, something in grand mal seizures, because that's a thing that happens, when you're on the floor, and there's a loss of consciousness and a lot of loss of physiological control. I haven't had any of those experiences. I've had some localized seizure activity, and there's been a really interesting correlated experience, a co-arising with these seizure experiences, which has been an energetic knot here over the heart center. So there's just as you might feel a knot in someone's back as you're massaging them, much the same in this front of the chest over the heart center. And I've had lots of interesting experiences in the past with intuitive body workers and lovers stimulating that knot, sometimes during these funny experiences, as I call these near seizure experiences. And so that awareness was there yesterday as I initially experienced an awareness of my injured brain, the injured part of the brain, and a sort of real sensitivity to that trauma and to that ow, that ow of the physical brain in that area being so roughly treated. And a sense of its fragility, a sense of its differentness, and soon after that, an altered state of consciousness arose, and I just sensed that I was perhaps about to have a seizure. So I said to my partner, Muse, and I noticed my mouth started to feel a bit strange, a bit of numbness around this area. So my speech is affected, but I could say, Muse, help. And I took the brake off my wheelchair and just moved over to the couch, was able to put the brake back on the wheelchair, stand up, get onto the couch and just get myself into a comfortable position and breathe into her heart. And Muse has been in this situation with me on a couple of occasions prior, so she's able to remain in presence and deepen into presence. Actually, I've noticed, and she's noticed, that when there's a demand for her calmness or her spaciousness, a need, it sort of is evoked or invited and shows forth. So she's able to take this very grounding role and hold my hand or have a hand on my knee and start to massage the curious knot. And I'm aware that there's a twitching happening here. So there's like a localized seizure, we could say, a localized convulsion, sort of very small spasm of the mouth. And I can talk, I can say to Muse, I know this is twitching. Yes, yeah, okay. And then describe the extraordinary experience that unfolds. It began with an emotional release. So the energetic knot that I have explored and touched and inquired into and felt the edge of and felt a little bit more of over the last 20, 30 years, I was able to feel the edge of it and know it in a way that had not prior been possible. I had not been able to get this close to it. tens of thousands of hours of yoga, qigong, meditation, embodiment practices, breath work, just going to the mat and sitting with this. I'm like, hey, let me feel you, let me know you. And in this moment, yesterday on the 29th of December at around 7:45 p.m. Australian Eastern Time, it opens itself. The defense falls away, or the mask drops, or the energetic defense that I constructed dropped. And I was able to feel just the edge of what I would now describe as a grief, like a grief of such immensity that I sensed it as something which would destroy me, something that would envelop me, that would overwhelm me. And this was a sense of a prior perception, hence the need to lock it down, repress it, dam it up, damn it in more ways than one. And in the touching off the edge of it, there's a dissipation of part of it. Part of it, this emotion, is allowed to move through me and be released. And so there's a cathartic release of tears and so on. It's really quite exquisite. And this also initiates an energetic process beyond the emotional and mental. And I start to feel pulses of energy. So whilst there's a, we could say a sort of pathological symptom of brain overfiring, a little pulsing, twitching of the mouth, there's a vibrational process going on down my left leg and my left side, my left arm. And somehow this is completely untroubling. Somehow it's known this is not a seizure. It's not an imminent seizure either, but rather this is a vibrational pulsing process of value and goodness for this nervous system, for this body. And as this unfolds, there's a deepening into the trauma, into the grief that I begin to perceive visually as this cylindrical black mass, quite sizable, that's been held inside me for some time. And I start to feel more of it, I start to open to more of it as my partner continues the massaging, and there's just a surrendering, a receptivity. And this is all just exquisitely beautiful. Such a profound and subtle healing. Such cathartic release, such biochemical shifts, such felt vibrational shifts. And this is only the beginning. I begin to enter into this sort of prayer-like absorption with this experience. And as I'm experiencing myself as a node of love, light, divinity, I notice myself, my vibrational brightness, being connected to other nodes of love, light, divinity. I don't know how else to describe pockets of love, of light, of exquisite warmth, of perfection, of divinity. I can't feel a better, more descriptive word than divinity. And you could characterize or symbolize these visible, felt, known pockets of love, light, divinity as beings. You could say, well, these are ascended masters or whatever, or grandfathers or teachers, past, present, future, localizing in time, space, and connecting at this moment in mutual exchange. Or you could say that they were merely locations in time and space, no being at all, simply a sacred site, a node. One sense though was that all of these nodes of that which I am one, also myself, located here, and there's others in different locations in time and space, is we are all connected, or certainly they are all directly connected to the one. They are the one, which I am also, the one field of pulsing consciousness, love, light, energy. I mean, it just, and I am that. I am that entirety, and I am this localized, individuated element, as are those nodes, simultaneously, holographically, microcosms of the macrocosm, in God's image, we could say, and separate and individuated, located in time and space, whilst ultimately non-local and timeless. And there's this experience of mutual lovemaking, essentially, of giving and receiving, simultaneously giving and receiving to these nodes, to this web of love, to this field, this pulsing field of love that I am. And to some extent there's the capacity to articulate some of what's going on to my sweetheart, my partner, Muse, who at times quite intuitively and naturally joins me in moments. So for example, she's breathing with me, she's noticing when my breath is deepening, when I'm and allowing a vibrational tonality to arrive with the breath that is somehow causative, somehow involving, somehow helpful in a way that's palpable. And Muse somehow knew to join me in that, so she would provide that safe, nourishing, physical touch. And she would also join the sigh and join the release as this simultaneous process of connecting to and embodying as the field of love, light divinity, and this integration of dissolution of loving of that which was articulated as grief, or this big black cylinder. And this is all articulated to some extent, and part of that was I might be dying. There was an awareness that this was an extreme experience, utterly extraordinary, unlike anything I've ever experienced before, and that there was a sense of being swallowed by, overwhelmed by this love, this field that I am, and that this in some respects was, if not actually, a return to source, a return to home, a return to God, a return to the emptiness, a return to the void, then at least symbolic of it, a death of sorts, a figurative death, a biochemical match perhaps, maybe a memoried echo neurologically of, yes. And yet, no, I'm not dying. And choice occurred. Whether this truly occurred or just an awareness of it or a thinking of it, but this was what seemed to be occurring. Thoughts of, no, I am wanting to be Will Pye. This for a while longer. This is enjoyable. And it's just getting very, very interesting. And yeah, so seemingly there was a choice not to die, or rather a choice to live, a choice to remain embodied as this. And then something rather wonderful happened. In the perception of, in the perceiving, the seeing, the feeling, the knowing, the vibrating as that which is connected to these chords, these channels of light and love that connect me to these other nodes of love, light, divinity, in this fabric of love, light, divinity that I am. So it's like I'm simultaneously the oceanic surface totality, the totality. There's no me apart from it. There's nothing visible, palpable, knowable, perceivable apart from it. And yet somehow I am this node that's somehow sort of over here rather than those other nodes out there. It's paradoxical and yet quite simple in the feeling of it. And this perceiving of, this awareness of these chords of connecting love, light and divinity that I'm amplifying and playing with and making love with, receiving, giving, receiving, discovering that process to be a simultaneity of oneness, dancing with itself, of flowing with itself, of experiencing itself and pulsing as itself through this body. The mystery of the body is love. The vibration of love holding all these atoms, all these cells, all these forms in apparent place. And this perception of chords, of tentacles of love, of light. Chords is probably feels like a more helpful word. I now see and direct a number of 6, 7, 8, 9 maybe chords flowing from me out to something that is in fact within me, that cylindrical barrel of what I would term grief, this immensity of energy, this ancient, huge explosion of energy condensed and contained into this bomb-proof, energetic black cylinder. And now I am perceiving in mind's eye that grief of mine, that energetic block of mine, localized in that knot in the heart, in a significant meridian point, I believe, here as here, and the tentacles I direct to wrap around the black cylinder of grief. I direct, and it becomes more and more total, more and more complete, to the point that the black cylinder of grief is consumed by, fully absorbed, and is as such consumed by that loving chord that has now become one annihilational, pick a new word, mass of love, basically. And it's a simultaneity once again. So the love has become the grief. It's perceived, it's observed that the grief, the black mass, the essence of that, the core of that is an exquisite sweetness, is a loving presence. And that is also the nature of, the quality of the spaciousness, the space, the awareness, the consciousness that is holding that in. So there's this simultaneity of that black cylinder of grief being dissolved, absorbed into the light, love, divinity, and recognizing that that is from whence it came. And the love, light, divinity being absorbed, fully consumed by the grief, black cylinder, energetic block. So the Taoist symbol, the yin-yang symbol, just exquisitely embodied and experienced on an energetic level, on a spiritual level, on the level of consciousness, integrating, we could say, the Father God of consciousness, the spaciousness, the void, the infinity, and the encompassing embodiment of the Mother God, of the chaos, of the Kali, of the emotional. I'm not sure if all those words really speak to those distinctions, to those apparent separate halves of one whole. But certainly the experience spoke powerfully to that truth of how perfectly symbolized in that yin-yang symbol, how white and black are totally separate yet codependent arisings of the same whole. And just as they are that, at the core of each is the other. There is that dot of white in the black, and there is that dot of black in the white. At the core of the grief, the darkness is light, is love. At the core of the love, the light, is this grief and darkness. And then there was more. And then there was a deepening into the felt experience and the release biochemically through tears and a bit of snot and so on. A willingness to let that wave just crash over me, overcoming this sort of modern or contemporary known sense of imminent seizure and not wanting to allow a seizure to happen because that can be problematic. And a sort of somatically recalled sense of not wanting to die, of not wanting to be swallowed by that overwhelming, overpowering grief that is just so powerful a pulse that it would surely wash me away, that it would surely destroy me, and hence must be locked down, repressed, until 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 15 lifetimes, whoever fucking knows, that energy is now ready and able to come up and be known and met and held and loved in a way that presumably was not prior possible. So this is all fascinating for me, and I'm reading The Brain's Way of Healing by Norman Doidge and finding myself so deeply moved by the accounts of people's miraculous healings. And the greatest miracle of all, perhaps, is how what great synthesizers such as Norman Doidge, great pioneers, great storytellers of the new paradigm. I noted that Norman Doidge, MD, is a poet as well as a doctor, and I think if you read his prose, you would not be surprised by that, because he takes us on these wonderful journeys, wonderful narrations of individual lives, of mother, father, son, and the researcher, and then the researcher that became a researcher through studying with that initial researcher, and then how now they found themselves in this treatment room in Toronto observing a miracle. And the other miracle being that people such as Norman Doidge and many others, an army of souls upon earth right now, are able to map these miracles neurologically, provide something approaching a mechanistic cause and effect process, the how. So what this looks like, just as a little taste of this book that you really must read, The Brain's Way of Healing. 3 or 4 year old boy, apparently autistic, told by a paediatric expert that they will pay, they're permanently damaged. And that there's really little hope for them. That by the age of 14, and they're 3 or 4 now, they were 3 or 4 at the time, they might have the mental age of a 2-year-old. And this child is behaving all sorts of autistic-like behaviours, just curious activities, obsessive repetition of the same actions, and so on. But also other non-autistic, like clearly capacity to perceive others, to know that there is another mind, another emotional experience happening over there, separate from my own. And anyway, so this deeply troubled, deeply problematic, hitting out, running around, just a disturbed child goes off to Toronto, listens to Mozart, Gregorian chanting, has edited, altered recordings of his mother's voice played back to him. And he's now speaking, he's now forming words, he's now recalling words. And the wider family are observing this child come back from a 2-week trip to Canada, and miracles have happened. The impossible has happened just in that short period of time. I just found myself so moved by this, I'm crying again and again and again, reading this book as I experience the brain's way of healing that is seemingly miraculous, and we are beginning to map the means of that miracle, the mechanism of that miracle. Another example was a child going through this sound therapy, and after one session, he went home and hugged his father for the first time ever in 3 or 4 years. There's this utterly exquisite happening now, as you can see, this coming into contact with, there's this touching of the edge of that grief and experiencing the embodiment of the integration of some of that intense emotion, some of that intense energy. And reading, discovering a mental map of what is occurring for many of these children, for many of these brains, for many of these nervous systems, and being able to apply to some extent or speculate, to begin to wonder how some of the similar processes or functions may be at play in the neuroplasticity that's no doubt underway throughout my nervous system as it recovers from the trauma of the brain surgery. And the elation and the bliss of the, just exquisitely delightful. I mean, I don't know if I've made it clear enough that this experience, this healing, this activation yesterday, is the most profound experience of my entire life. It had that translingual quality of profound psychedelic exploration, or as I prefer, entheogenic exploration, not mind manifesting psychedelia, but entheogenic, God, experiencing God, connecting with God, entheo, generating connection with God. And yet what was most remarkable about this experience in that regard, whilst closely proximus to the entheogenic experience, a DMT experience perhaps, the only biochemical explanation would have to be upon an endogenously sourced DMT or surge of dopamine or neuroadrenaline or serotonin, or all of them at the same time. There was a sort of sense of all of the notes being played, all of the frequencies being sung, all of the songs being sung, and there was this sense very much of, if it were possible for a number of human beings or a number of antennae upon planet Earth, perhaps the entire planet itself, to go through a process by which it, she, the whole, absorbed, tuned into a new frequency, a new fundamental vibrational reality of consciousness, of the universe. If that were possible, if this new song were to be sung, if an Om in an infinite faraway galaxy were to find its way through time-space to this nervous system now, and it were to absorb that timeless higher frequency, higher consciousness, and integrate that into every element of its cellular function. If that were possible, at some point in history, at some point in time, as the Earth, the human consciousness goes through an awakening, an increasing frequency, then I had that experience last night. That happened to me, and so I wonder how many others it happened to, and how that manifested for them. It's easy to see how what happened yesterday for a different nervous system could have become a seizure, it could have become a panic attack, it could have become a nervous breakdown, it could have become all manner of chaotic unfoldings. And yet, having had the opportunity to practice with, to give this nervous system, this neurology time to get used to an overexcited brain, to allow an overexcited brain to come to rest, to bring a somatic awareness sufficiently developed to distinguish and differentiate between subtle energy movements, emotional movements, thoughts, more fundamental vibrational, energetic pulsing, and so on. All of that allowed it to be the experience that it was, that I would characterize as being a profound mystical experience, a profound classical death rebirth experience, a absolute textbook death rebirth experience. And the experiential knowing of the mystery of the body as love. This was presented to me as a koana of sorts, a riddle, many years ago through a aura soma reading. It was speaking of the emergence of the Christ energy, or the Christ consciousness within this nervous system, and of the mystery of the body as love. And I feel that I have touched the edge of that mystery, explored the wisps of that mystery of the body as love. This body, this physical body, held together as it is by its more fundamental electrical bodies, its electromagnetic bodies, its subtle bodies, but including too this body in its entirety, certainly including my brain, synthesized, localized, held by love, connected by love. All those electrons are vibrating together in love as love. a funny experience. A seizure, a conventional psychologist might term it a delusional experience, or something like this, but the mystic, on the other hand, perceives these states as more real than reality. Similarly, as people experiencing entheogenic adjustments to their consciousness will often note that it has a hyper reality, and these experiences are both more real and more meaningful. Often people will describe them even the birth of their child or their wedding day. This is repeated in the experiments. You give people a certain, I'm not sure how essential the protocol is, but you give people a certain protocol and a certain dose range of psilocybin. I believe it's in the, actually I'm not sure, I think it's in the sort of 2-gram range, or a bit less perhaps. Then 90% of them will share that at the completion in the self-report questionnaire following. They'll describe it as one of, if not the most meaningful experience of their entire life. And a significant portion will say that it is more than any other happening that they can recall, including their children's birth, their wedding day. This experience was the most meaningful. And in this case, it's abundantly clear why. Because there is the knowing of God. There is the knowing of an infinitely intelligent, non-localized, loving presence, and a knowing that I am that. I mean, I just don't, call it something other than God if you prefer. Call it the 0 point field, or the essential fabric of form, the field of potential, the constant plenum of pulsating energy from which apparent form is arising, including this apparent form, this physical body mind now. So, 95 days in, post-surgery update. Also, by the way, that's not even the most, actually probably is the most interesting thing that's happened in the last few days. But I've also discovered that I can walk. So, yeah, maybe that's another episode. Yeah. Thank you so much for connecting with me and hearing what I had to say. I invite you to take a moment once again to pause and take a deep breath. And if it feels nourishing to do so again, and allow it to be a little bit deeper and a little bit more down into the root, so in through the heart and down into the root. So imagining we have a nose here in the center of the chest. So always with the nose, always breathing with the nose, breathing deep through the nose, into the heart, down into the root chakra, connecting with the earth. Breathing in deep, and then the out breath equally lengthy as the in-breath. And enjoy it. Savor it. get it wrong. Well, you can if you get the balance, the ratio wrong, and you hyperventilate and breathe in too much carbon dioxide, but you'd have to try pretty hard to get it that wrong. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. I'm still very much in a state of considerable expansion, and the mind is prone to wandering off. The energy is flowing as the energy wants to flow. And I feel that is update number 5 complete. Thank you for joining me. I hope this sharing has delivered some value, a taste of peace and love that you are perhaps, and that this is as it is. Thank you.